authorized payment on the Walker policy?
Someone broke into their house, Mr. Huff. Their policy clearly covers them against
I don't want to know
any
about their
litigation.
coverage, Bob. Don't tell me about their coverage. Tell me how you're keeping Insuracare in the black. Tell me how that's possible with you writing checks to every Harry Hardluck and Sally sob story that gives you a phone call.
Morning break is over. Morning break is over.
These kids sitting on the driveway. Oh, great. Oh, gee.
Request claim on claim numbers 158, 183. You will be
Got him yet? Then where is he?
Mr. Huff would like to talk to you in his office.
Now?
Now.
Sit down, Bob. I'm not happy, Bob. Not happy. Ask me why.
Okay. Why?
Why what? Be specific, Bob.
Why are you unhappy?
Your customers make me unhappy.
What? You've gotten complaints?
Complaints I can handle. What I can't handle is your customers' inexplicable knowledge of Insuracare's inner workings. They're experts! Experts, Bob! Exploiting every loophole, dodging every obstacle. They're penetrating the bureaucracy!
Did I do something illegal?
No.
Are you saying we shouldn't help our customers?
The law requires that I answer no.
We're supposed to help people.
We're supposed to help our people! Starting with our stockholders, Bob! Who's helping them out, huh?
Well, what are you waiting for?
I don't know. Something amazing, I guess.
Me too, kid.
Oh, sounds like a few people may have known the last line there. What are you waiting for? Something amazing, I guess. Me too, kid. Me too. Welcome again to the Elm City Vineyard. We're so glad that you are here. We are in our second week of a new teaching series, Longing for Life, opening ourselves to change. And in this series, we're considering each week the deep longings of our hearts, our longings for the stuff of life, for love and significance and beauty and power and more. And now the fact is that the substance of true life isn't something we can just have. We ourselves need to fit with these things. We need to become the sorts of people whose lives are in sync with the good things that we long for. And as a result, if we have ears to hear God's invitation to us, the things that we long for lead us into profound processes of change. And that's actually really good news because the prospect of change can be scary, but if we lean into the God-giving longings of our hearts, if we allow God to show us what these longings are really about, allow God to shift and recast these longings themselves, then we find ourselves already walking on the path to becoming the people that we were created to be. And this week, the longing that we're talking about is a longing for significance. Like that little boy at the end of that clip, we're all waiting for something amazing. I've always related to that little boy. How many people love The Incredibles? Have you seen this movie? All right. That's good. I've always really related to this, right? This sort of living in this world and yet feeling like there's something more and like it's always just sort of outside your grasp, or like sort of structures are set up to make that really hard to find. I always related to that little boy just sort of waiting for something amazing, not exactly sure where it's going to come from or what its source is going to be or what it's going to look like when it comes, but we're longing for something amazing. And maybe if not, maybe we couldn't own up to that sort of fanciful language. Maybe not something amazing, but at least something meaningful, something of significance. We long for significance, for meaning. We long for our lives to amount to something, to leave our mark, large or small, on the world. And for many of us, our longing for significance takes the form of a longing for greatness, which is maybe even more what The Incredibles are ultimately about. In the words of my students with whom I talk each week about our heart's deepest longings, we long to make an impact. It's easy to sort of like poke fun at that word, and we'll talk a lot about how a lot of this language that's actually, I think, really, really good things has maybe gotten a bit tired in our world. But I mean, to take it just on its face, I really relate to that instinct. We want to be not just good, we want to do something great, amount to something in the world, to do our best, or even and be or do something great. Like I said, it'd be easy to get cynical about this longing. It'd be easy to say that essentially this longing just boils down to a desire, for example, maybe a desire to be famous. After all, our culture worships celebrity in ways that profoundly distorts our humanity. And in our weaker moments, perhaps this is what our longing for significance, for greatness becomes: a mere desire to be liked, to fit in, to be celebrated by whoever happens to be watching. But I take it that most of us, whether we're religious or not, whether we're following Jesus or not, we know that the significance, even the greatness that we long for, often comes without celebrity, without adulation. Often, actually, it comes with great opposition, whether the nagging small-mindedness of a power broker like Mr. Incredible's boss, or the sorts of resistance that ends up looking a lot more dramatic. We know the difference between significance and celebrity, between true greatness and fleeting glory. And I think that chips on the table, actually, we know what we truly long for. We long for the real stuff of life, for significance and greatness of the true sort. But I'm not here this afternoon to defend our longings. I don't want to just talk about what it is that we want. I want to talk about what it is that's worth wanting, and whether we happen to want that or not. This afternoon, I want to suggest that significance and greatness are, in fact, worth wanting. I want to suggest that they're not just desires of ours that God is willing to accommodate, but in fact, God has called us to live lives of significance, called us, yes, even to greatness of a certain sort. I want to suggest that we long for these things because God created us for them, and that our longing for greatness can lead us into a profound process of transformation as we become people whose characters fit with the lives of significance to which we're called. It's my hope this afternoon is that God will deepen and direct our longing for significance so that we may find God in our longings and be transformed into the likeness of Jesus along the way. So let's pray. Holy Spirit, I thank you that you have been at work in our hearts and our minds. Long before we walked into this room, long before perhaps we ever heard your name. And so, Holy Spirit, I ask that you would be here this afternoon. Would you help us look honestly at our desires so that we would find you where you are as you call us forward to become people, the people you created us to be. So come, Holy Spirit. Have your way in this place. Amen. So I want to look at this question of significance by looking at two stories from the lives of two of Jesus' earliest followers, two of the disciples, two brothers, James and John. And I actually want to start with the story of the very first time they show up in the Bible. It says, as Jesus passed along the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And Jesus said to them, follow me, and I will make you fish for people. And immediately they left their nets and followed him. As he went a little farther, he saw James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John, who were in their boat mending the nets. Immediately he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men and followed Jesus. So when Jesus first encounters these guys, there's nothing that special about them, right? They're just living their lives. They're working the family business. They're out in the fishing boat with their father. Nothing ambitious, nothing remarkable. Jesus' call sort of comes out of nowhere. I mean, let's get it right. Expectations in this particular place couldn't have been lower, right? I mean, these were people just average Joes working out on the lake at the edge of the empire. I mean, hardly could have been less sort of impressive. But then all of a sudden, here it is. Follow me, and I will make you fish for people. I've always been puzzled by what could possibly make these guys follow at the drop of a hat like they do. I often read this passage with folks that don't read the Bible very often, and that's like their immediate first question. Like, did I miss something? Maybe like you didn't give me the part of the story where like they knew Jesus for a few years and were just waiting for him to come call. No, we could, I suppose, imagine things outside of the text that we could supply, things like a prior relationship, or we could just sort of imagine that there was some sort of supernaturally persuasive presence that Jesus had. But I take it actually we don't need to leave the text to find some answers. We have enough here to form a hypothesis, and then later on what we'll see, I think, will give us some confirmation for our hypothesis. You see, I take it that James and John, like all of us, are looking for significance. Maybe even looking for greatness. As I said, that would have seemed a bit far-fetched out there on the lake in the boat with the fish net and their father at the edge of the empire. No one and nowhere was less significant than these guys. But nothing makes our longing for significance sting more than to be surrounded with the unexceptional. Nothing makes us long more for greatness than to feel unexceptional. And so this very pedestrian picture that Mark paints for us only further deepens our sense that these guys were longing for something more. Longing for significance, longing to amount to something, longing for greatness. And as I said, we'll see where this leads them in a bit later. Such that as Jesus is walking along these shore, these guys are actually already sort of spring-loaded for adventure. And when the call comes, they're practically launched out of the boat by their longing for life and their hope. And as readers of the gospel, we know that they have good reason for their hope. Their hope is that they are at the beginning of a great adventure. This is that extraordinary moment where the magical interrupts the mundane. What began as a random, say, Tuesday morning turns into the beginning of what Joseph Campbell calls the hero's journey. Like the end of Bilbo's 11th birthday party when Frodo is called out of the Shire. Or like the regular weekday evening routine interrupted by Mr. Incredible's self-destructing video invitation to come be a superhero once again. It's the beginning of the hero's journey, a journey each of us longs to take. And it begins with an invitation to change the way that they see their calling, to elevate what once seemed so pedestrian, the family fishing business, and see in it something more. Follow me, and I will make you fish for people. In essence, the invitation is to dream bigger, to lift up their heads and give legs to the dreams that they had long entertained but had never dared let slip through their lips. Jesus appears and gives them warrant to dream and to live bigger. More than that, he calls them to do so. Jesus isn't just giving them permission, he actually conveys a responsibility to live for more than just the means of life, live for more than just fish, a responsibility to set out to discover what it is they actually have really been searching for all along. This invitation and this responsibility, both of these are ours as well. Jesus is here today, daring us to dream bigger, calling us to dream God-sized dreams for our futures and the futures of those around us, calling us to lean into that longing for significance that God put there to begin with, and to walk with him into this adventure of transformation that inevitably follows. And for some here today, this is going to be the hardest part right here, just daring to dream big for the first time perhaps, or daring to dream big again after a deep disappointment, after a dream that sort of ran off the rails. If that's you, you need to hear this afternoon, this call to dream bigger. An invitation and even more a responsibility that God has given us just because of what we are as human beings, who God created human beings to be, to have a particular role in the creation that God made, to dream alongside, to co-create with God, to chart a future, to enter into God's future as it enters into our present. For others of us, this might seem relatively intuitive. This sort of longing for significance, for greatness. Maybe that's just a basic feature of our experience of life. Though maybe we've never really thought about God all that much. Maybe God isn't that much of a part of this. Maybe we sort of have our ambition over here and God over there. Maybe we sort of like it that way, or maybe it feels more pious that way. And certainly for me, when I arrived in New Haven as a college student many years ago, I had already internalized the idea that I was bound for more than what was around me. It would take some time for me to sort out all that was being squirreled into that more than. And it would take even longer to come back and recognize that core longing as something that God had placed inside me to begin with. And I began to see myself more and more in this story of these guys, James and John. 9 chapters later, we find James and John a fair way along their journey. We skipped over this. This isn't like the next time we see them. But, they're a fair way into their journey. They're still seeking after the significance. They're still seeking after the greatness that they long for. But here it's begun to take an ugly turn. The two brothers are pretty direct about what they're after. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came forward to Jesus and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." If you've ever had a small child in your world, you know this trick. First, you say like, "Mommy, Daddy, I want you to say yes." And you're like, First you ask the question, then I give the answer. Jesus will not be fooled. "What is it that you want me to do for you?" And they say to him, "Grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your glory." As I said, James and John have been on the journey with Jesus for quite some time now. They've seen people healed. They've seen demons cast out. They've seen the blind restored to sight. Not long before this passage, we read about James and John accompanying Jesus to a mountaintop where Jesus is transfigured before their eyes and appears in this sort of otherworldly conversation with Moses and Elijah, the heroes of James and John's religious community. Lots of heady stuff going on. But there hasn't been much payout for James and John personally on the greatness front. And so, tired of their backstage passes, they want to know when they'll get their moment on stage. Preferably, at the end when you get to bow, without having to do much of the work. James and John want to know, when Jesus comes into his glory, when he reaches peak greatness, can they have the positions of honor? Is there any chance that some of that greatness could come their way? They made the cut for the trip to the top of the mountain. So that's got them thinking there's a pecking order here. They just want to know exactly where they rank. Jesus is not in the business of making those sorts of promises. And he isn't sure that they really know what they're talking about. Goes on to say, Jesus said to them, "You don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with?" And they replied, "We are able." I think we have to picture Jesus smiling at this point. Kindly, Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink, you will drink. And with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or at my left is not mine to grant, but is for those for whom it has been prepared." Jesus' response is telling. You don't know what you're asking for. You're asking for greatness. It's what you long for, but I'm not sure you know what it is. My greatness is going to take a shape you might not expect. And if we've read the Bible a bunch or we've been in church a while, we can catch the allusions that surely would have been lost on James and John. The cup that Jesus drinks is one he'd have preferred to have let pass. The cup that he drinks is the same one that we will later bless as a participation in Jesus' blood. Perhaps the most striking language of all, however, is the language that James and John themselves have offered. The positions on the right and the left have indeed been reserved. There's an arrogant pride here that has blinded James and John to the reality of how things really work. Word of the exchange gets back to the other disciples. When the 10, that is the 12 minus 2, when the 10 heard this, they began to be angry with James and John. So Jesus called them and said to them, that is to all of them, "You know that among the Gentiles, among the nations, the point is those other people, not you. This isn't how it should be with you. But you know how it works in the world. Those who they recognize as their rulers lord it over them. And their great ones are tyrants over them. But it's not so among you. But whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to serve, or not to be served, rather, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." The anger that the brothers' request has fomented reveals the fact that not just James and John, but all of Jesus' disciples could use a lesson on what true greatness looks like. And Jesus explains that he himself came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life for many. Greatness, it turns out, isn't about ourselves. Greatness isn't about the self. Greatness is about others. Significance comes not from the accolades we get from others, but rather from what we can offer to others. So if James and John want to bask in Jesus' greatness, if they want some of that greatness to rub off, if they want to find what their hearts truly long for, they'll need to learn to dream themselves out of the center of their dreams. Their dreams will need to center on those people for whom they were called to fish, those people and that community that Jesus has invited them to gather together. If they want to be great, they'll need to become servants. If they want to be first, they'll need to become slaves of all. This is what greatness looks like. This is the sort of greatness that Jesus is offering. He just wants to make sure James and John know what they're asking for. I said that when I first came to college, greatness was a pretty central pillar of my self-understanding. There's probably part of me that thought that I already had it, like in some sort of quantity. I'm just being honest. I'm not proud of that, but that was the state of affairs. And I had even more of a sense that, of course, like coming to college now was like when like the greatness like was about to like take off, right? Like greatness train was like leaving the station. I was the conductor. Like we were going great places. Specifically for me, it was all invested in music. I've shared here many times before. My plan was I was gonna be a conductor of a major symphony orchestra and a composer in residence. Just the Leonard Bernstein route or something modest. Aaron Copland, that would be okay. And so that was the plan. As I arrived on campus, that was the plan. All my energy and all my time was going into that. I was writing music, looking to get it performed, scoring for various ensembles and seeing how that went, trying to learn along the way. But what I started to realize as I was gathering, I realized I started collecting. I had a poster for every show I ever played in or wrote music for. I was collecting these posters. They were starting to fill the wall of my dorm room, and I started to realize I was hoarding these things. These were like I was like, when someone would ask me, "Hey, would you like to like write a piece for this thing?" I was mostly thinking like, "Well, how big is the poster?" I really like. I'm looking for like it's gonna be full color. Sweet, I'm in. You need to have the piece done by tomorrow. No problem. I will come up with something. And I started to realize as I went along, and largely from reading the Gospel of Mark and spending some time with some people who are trying to follow Jesus, I started to realize, shoot, man, I think I'm more interested in being famous than I am about being good. I don't just mean like morally good. I was definitely more interested in being famous than being morally good. I was actually more interested in being famous than even being like artistically like good. I didn't care if the work was garbage. I wanted to make sure that people knew my name. And there it was in the Gospel of Mark, this call that Jesus gave to these disciples to come and to follow and to leave whatever they had and whatever had defined them behind. To sort of swap in their understanding of greatness for an understanding of greatness that Jesus had. And this was nothing less than salvation for me. Rescue in a visceral, practical sense. It was the beginning of a crack in a certain sort of self-obsession that I continue to suffer from and try to work through. But it was a turning point to begin to say, all right, how can I let Jesus radically reshape my understanding of what greatness looks like? How can I leave everything that had defined me behind? And ultimately, I stopped writing music. I stopped performing music. It became one of those things Jesus says, if your hand causes you to sin, better for you to cut it off. I thought, all right, here we go. Painful, but maybe this is the way forward. Eventually, though, this started to go in like I said, this was salvation for me, but eventually it started to go in something of an unhelpful direction. Eventually, I started to get the sense that what God was opposed to wasn't just my pride. I mean, of course, I knew God was opposed to my pride, but God, I came to think, was actually just opposed to my longing for greatness, period. I started to think that the key to life following Jesus was in being willing to leave life behind in the boat. And my life started to look more and more like the very gray world of The Incredibles, a celebration, or I was trying to train myself in the celebration of mediocrity. In retrospect, I've come to call this the gospel of be mediocre for Jesus. I don't recommend, there's actually nothing that's good news about that. But this is actually, yeah. So linguists, sometimes when they write books about languages, they have to put in wrong forms in the text to show you, like, this is how it might have gone, but it doesn't exist. They put an asterisk next to it to make sure you know you're not going to copy out that form and get your grammar wrong. All right, that's the point of that asterisk. You might see one more before this is over. But this is how we lived our lives for a season. This is how we thought. We would compete with one another, not usually in actuality. We're actually mostly too cowardly to actually take these sort of mediocrity-embracing steps, but we at least fantasized about what colossal wastes we would be willing to make of our educations for the sake of the gospel. Now, for the sake of the gospel was just an empty phrase. It was just, I think I sort of thought about it as just a test of my faith. Would I be willing to sacrifice my longing for significance to prove my devotion to Jesus? It's as if in fleeing from sinful pride, I was striving after holy sloth. Another thing that needs an asterisk. Dude, I'm not even gonna joke. If you do a Google image search for holy sloth, you are gonna find more hits than you would believe. There are a lot of like papal sloths out there, as it turns out. Holy cow. Anyway. Again, there is no such thing, I take it, as holy sloth. We actually just talked about sloth in our list of deadly sins. And for what it's worth, this sort of piety didn't actually work anyway. The longing was still there, held in check by a perverted sense of piety, but it was there like a thorn in the flesh, or was it actually the very breath of life? I was a mess. It was clear that something was amiss. And I was driven back to this same passage that had been part of launching this semi-salvation in my life years before. And I noticed there's actually something here for poor saps like me. There's something here in this passage for folks who wish to become great. That's actually, Jesus names this group of people. I thought, oh, this is me. Oh, this is good. Jesus actually has something to say to me. This is who Jesus is addressing. And I realized what follows after he calls out poor people like me isn't an admonishment. Jesus wasn't trying to shame me for wanting to be great. He was trying to help me do better than the petty dreams that had dominated my life earlier on. This wasn't a screed against greatness. It was advice on how best to become truly great. Wisdom about what greatness truly is and how best to become one whom greatness fits. The invitation was to open myself to dream kingdom dreams, cosmic in scope, and for that reason, centered on God rather than on myself. You see, there's a temptation here to see James and John as having gone too far in their pursuit of greatness. As if Jesus had to rein them back in after they overstepped his original invitation. I think that would be the wrong way to see it. If Jesus isn't trying to rein in their longing for greatness, he's trying to expand it, extend it, help it reach its ultimate true goal. Jesus' concern for them isn't that their dreams are too big, it's that they're too small. These seeming dreams of grandeur are actually petty in as much as they're oriented around themselves. The dreams of the self produce monuments to the self. Even the flashiest of these eventually become just that, monuments, no more, signifying nothing more than the self-obsession of a personality long since forgotten. The greatness that Jesus offers has the possibility of lasting vitality. As generation after generation is impressed not with the grandeur of this man and his accomplishments, but rather infused with the life-giving power of the love that he has demonstrated, which is the very nature of the God whom he is and serves. The key difference is those people for whom James and John were to fish and the posture they ought to take toward them. Jesus' invitation is, come, live for these people. Give your lives for them. Give your lives for the sake of the kingdom of God, the justice and peace and joy coming to be in the midst of these people whom you serve. Let your dreams become cosmic and in scope, and for that reason centered on God rather than yourself. God does not look on our dreams and think them too large. God looks on our dreams and thinks them too small, particularly in the sense of being too narrow. Seeking significance is not a matter of striking a balance between pride and sloth. I've sometimes thought about it, even recently thought about it that way. It's not a matter of carefully charting a path between them like two banks of a narrowing river. Rather, pride and sloth can both be transcended at once. The godly path to significance, the greatness truly worth wanting, invites us into a process of transformation that defeats both pride and sloth in a single move, conquering our sloth with a vision of life too big, too expansive, too inclusive to get bogged down in petty pride. In that season in which God was sort of reawakening this stuff, rehabilitating my longing for greatness, I had a friend, Mark Jonas, whose inspiration was absolutely pivotal in the process. And Mark had a definition of humility that rocked my world. He said, humility is not a matter of thinking small about yourself or representing yourself sort of modestly in the world. He said, I'll tell you how humility has worked in my life. Humility is regularly telling people about the insanely big dreams that God has given you, and then dealing honestly with this absurdity that God-sized dreams bring to mind when considering human-sized people. So Mark would regularly tell people, he was a high school educator, he would regularly tell people that his goal, his call from God was total world transformation. He's just like, I'll just tell you, this is what I'm about. I want to see the entire world changed. That's my goal. That's what I'm about. That's what you should judge me on. It was a discipline of humility. He would even say a discipline of humiliation in his life. Because the thought that he alone could do such a thing was so absurd that it was humbling, embarrassing, he would say, to nevertheless own this audacious goal. And maybe we've collectively worn out the phrase changing the world so that it no longer sounds as shocking as it did when Mark said it 15 years ago, but I hope you follow what I mean. What would it look like to enter into that sort of humility that meant allowing God to widen our view of the things that God's doing in the world, such that to really say that's what my life is after would feel so preposterous that we couldn't help but feel humble in even uttering it. Does that make sense? Pride and sloth gone in one move. I know we're a few weeks early, but a few of you in this room I know are getting close to graduating from one or another. Yeah, you can be excited about that. It's a little bit of work to be done yet, but we can celebrate. Nice. I know a few of you in this room are getting close to graduating, and maybe whether that's from college or from graduate school. And in the next couple of months, you're going to have countless people telling you to dream big. They're going to be telling you, dream big. You can do anything. Dream big. They'll say that, but I think most of them won't really mean it. They'll tell you to dream big, but the dreams they'll have in mind will be relatively paltry ones. Dreams of career success, technological innovation, or a fat payday. They'll call it impact, but because they love you, but are confused about what you are as a human being, they will dream far too small. Don't get sucked in. Whoever we are, whether graduation is coming next month, next year, or God knows when, or whether graduation is a memory too distant to call to mind, let's refuse to dream dreams any smaller than the scale of the new creation. Let's refuse to dream dreams that leave us at the center. Three challenges this afternoon. First, I invite you to open yourself to dreaming bigger. As I said, for some of us in this room, that's the real challenge, especially perhaps if you feel like, I've been through a round of this, man. I've been through a round of dreaming big. It blew up in my face. I'm not sure I can take that risk anymore. When I say that God has put our sort of this longing for significance in us, I'm not saying that God has guaranteed success in any number of our endeavors. That's just not how this goes. But what I am saying is that as we pursue, as we try to find the things that God has called us to, as we do our best and face opposition and sometimes fail along the way, doing all of that in dialogue with Jesus, who loves us before we lift a finger, that's the best way to enter into that sort of courageous life to which God has called us. Second, challenge you, open yourself to dreaming yourself out of the center. And I don't know, I've gone back and forth on this one. I still am sort of like, the jury's out for me on whether my sort of, because my life really has sort of had, the last 20 years of my life has sort of had two phases of just this sort of pretty straightforward, like, attempt at pretty straightforward self-denial, failure at the self-denial, but at a sort of like self-denial that even if I had succeeded at, I'm not sure it would have been the whole gospel. And then this later season of trying to sort of put the pieces back together. I don't know if we have to, I don't know if if those steps are just, that's sort of how life goes. Maybe you are the sort of person God can give the whole thing to. Sometimes for me it seems like I need a piece at a time. So maybe you're in one of these seasons where it really is. Who is God, or who do you understand yourself to be, and what would it be like to lay that down at the feet of Jesus and see what Jesus would do, where Jesus would lead you. And then third challenge is to open yourself to dreaming kingdom dreams, cosmic in scope and centered on God rather than yourself. One thing I love about this church is this is what we do as a community. These are the sorts of dreams that we dream together. Dreams that, I don't know if you felt this, but every once in a while I actually have felt this. If you actually have to talk about the ECV vision with like folks that aren't part of this church, you can get a little bit of that like humiliation, right? Of like this community dreams big, dreams really big, and that's good. Are we dreaming in ways that take us out of the center and put God there rather than ourselves? I'm going to invite the worship team to come up. In his humility on the cross, Jesus exposes, we've been talking about pride and sloth, and as we enter into communion, we're thinking about this one unified narrative of Jesus going to the cross and being raised to new life. My favorite theologians, Karl Barth, talks about the way that Jesus confronts each of these two. He takes them to be sort of the two cardinal sins of pride and sloth in this single narrative. In his humility on the cross, Jesus exposes and combats our pride. In the courage of his resurrection, Jesus exposes and combats our sloth. And so as we receive communion, we remember and enter into both the humility of Christ's cross and the courage of his resurrection and exaltation. So let us follow the one who dared to dream and even more to live God-sized, other-centered dreams. Dreams of the kingdom. Dreams of this moment in which Jesus' greatest humiliation becomes our greatest glory, our greatest joy, the feast of the people of God. So as the band leads us into a time of musical worship, I invite you to come forward if you're a follower of Jesus, or if you'd like to begin following Jesus, and to come forward and to tear off a piece of the bread, Christ's body broken for you, and to dip it in the cup, Christ's blood shed for you, as a way of entering into his humility and his courage, to have him put to death in a single stroke our sloth and our pride. So Holy Spirit, would you come and do that work here in this place? We bless these elements with your presence. Would you come and make yourself present to us in them, that they would indeed be a participation in your suffering